All right, Nate, we are back looking into some wide receiver tiered rankings for 2023. Last week, we covered our early rookie rankings for 2023. Now we're looking at the wide receiver position. Nate, you were nice enough to share this with the world, a little sneak preview of your wide receiver rankings heading into 2023 early. These don't include rookie wide receivers yet. We'll get those implemented probably after the draft, maybe a touch before. We'll look at them then. But why don't you dive into your first tier? Tell us all about what you got here.
Yeah, I think the first tier is pretty standard across the board with most people who are ranking these wide receivers. There's a very clear, hey, the top tier is Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. You can honestly put them in whatever order you want. Beginning of the season, end of last offseason, I was a little iffy on, when Higgins and Chase play together, their numbers are pretty similar. Chase took a step forward, I think, this year because I think Higgins just continues to miss games more than Chase does, even though Chase did have a little injury stretch this year. I just feel better about, I think, Chase as a consistent target. While T. Higgins will always end the season with, a high ranking, just the consistency is not there like it is with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. And that's why you have these guys in that top tier. They offer that consistency with that upside, with how young they are. I mean, it's a no-brainer to have these guys at the top.
I have zero disagreements here. I have the same thing with my ranks. I have mine pulled up so I can cross-reference with you, Nate, and call you out on your BS as we go along. I have nothing to say here. I am absolutely with it with these two guys. I think there's always going to be the argument because there always has to be number one. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be the Jamar Chase versus Justin Jefferson. And I think at this point, it's kind of up to your flavor. At some point, since there is an age difference, we're going to have that discussion. But that's still like 4 years away. I mean, these guys are studs, and I don't see anybody coming for them. I know we have Marvin Harrison Jr. coming out next year that everybody wants to put up by them. I think we need to pump the brakes on that. But we got some great wide receivers here, especially at the top, for a long time, I think. So why don't we get into this next tier, peel this one back, and talk about what we got.
Yeah, this next tier, it's another exciting tier, and it's a little large, I think, for a tier 2, but we're just there with our wide receivers, I think, in the NFL. There's a lot of top talent at the wide receiver position in the NFL where we live in a great era for wide receivers. Yes. In this tier 2, I got Jalen Waddle, I have T. Higgins, I have CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, and I have Garrett Wilson in there. We don't need to go over too much with Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins. These guys, they have put up big numbers. Jalen Waddle did struggle with some injuries this year, some consistency as the Dolphins offense struggled there. But I think that was more of the Dolphins offense and, the quarterback issues than it was Jalen Waddle. Yeah. And, T. Higgins, when he's healthy, when he's on the field, he's able to put some huge numbers with Burrow. CeeDee Lamb, I think, CeeDee is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL right now, and he plays for the Cowboys, and I think that gets him some extra hate. But you look at the numbers, you look at how he plays when he's on the field, how he gets targeted by Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott, whether or not he can win the big games, he's a good quarterback for fantasy football. So CeeDee Lamb, I do think absolutely belongs in this tier, especially because he is only 23 years old. And then A.J. Brown, stud, ain't too much more to say than that. And then Garrett Wilson. It's bold to have a rookie in this tier already.
I agree.
But I think Garrett Wilson is that guy. I really think Garrett Wilson is that guy. And I think by the end of the next season, it'll make total sense to have Garrett Wilson ranked here. And in Dynasty, he's being ranked, and this might even be low. This is a tier ranking, so I'm not saying he's necessarily the 7th best or the 3rd best, but he's in that range. And I think a lot of people are starting to look at him that way. And I think by the time we get to the season, especially when the season starts, we'll all be there as a group.
Yeah, I have pretty much the exact same tier here. I don't have Garrett Wilson or T. Higgins in this grouping yet. T. Higgins is in the very top of the next grouping for me, and so is Garrett Wilson. He's also in that grouping as well. I think we're kind of splitting hairs. It's very close mix with those two. Both super young players. I think Garrett Wilson, this year, which something we love to see, proved he's fairly quarterback proof. Yeah. Most games, regardless of who the quarterback was, he was out there, he was looked at, he was targeted, and was just an awesome player on this team. So that's my only gripes with this tier. Otherwise, I love this grouping. Like you said, we are very spoiled with wide receivers right now. We are in a bit of a golden age of great young wide receiver depth. And the best part is, all these guys are so young, and we have so much talent still coming in. And it's just going to be exciting to watch the wide receiver rooms grow. And, when we're looking at our top 12, wide receivers that are all producing like top 12 wide receivers, and they're all under the age of 25, 26 in the next couple of years, we're going to be pretty happy.
One more thing with Garrett Wilson, to put him into this tier, you've said that he was, somewhat quarterback proof.
Yep.
And throughout the this season, he saw Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson, Mike White, and still he put up 83 receptions, which was 20th in the NFL. 1,103 yards, which was 15th in the NFL. He only had 4 touchdowns. And, we're putting him in the same tier as A.J. Brown, who had 88 receptions, almost 1,500 receiving yards, and 11 touchdowns. Say Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets. Say Jimmy G goes to the Jets even.
Sure.
Garrett Wilson would be set up to have a better sophomore season than his rookie season. I mean, he's a quarterback who can throw touchdowns away from maybe having a top 5,
Sure.
wide receiver season. I mean, A.J. Brown's pretty high expectations, but I think Garrett Wilson, where he's at already, he joins this list that's growing of these young wide receivers who are becoming the top in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree too much, because I certainly agree that he has that potential, and he's only a quarterback away. In this league with our quarterback shortage, even though we're seeing a ton of hype that the Jets are a front runner to go land Aaron Rodgers, which as a Packers fan, I'm thrilled that Aaron Rodgers could be leaving my team. I do think that helps, and I do see a world where he gets there. I'm just not there yet, is kind of the thing. So why don't we dive into this next tier? I love Garrett Wilson, just for clarification, but let's dive into this next tier, see who we got here.
All right. So this next tier 3, this is kind of these guys are a little bit older than that top group, but they're still putting up lots of fantasy points. And at the end of the day, as much as we want to have a good, young, exciting team, you need those fantasy points and you need these veterans to help get you that contending team. So these guys are Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp. And then I got DK Metcalf in there because I really think he belongs, in this tier, because I don't have him quite in that top tier with A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, those other guys, but I really do like DK, and I don't think he belongs in a tier below these guys. So he's in here with the older veterans, but we know that over the next 2-3 year window, these guys are going to score a lot of fantasy points. Now, at the end of that window, these guys might be toast.
Sure.
We've seen some wide receivers play into their 30s. We've seen some wide receivers drop off as soon as they hit that 30 mark.
Yep.
And you don't even know, because we've seen guys like Julio Jones, all-time greats, drop off. It's a young man's game these days. Same thing with running backs, but for wide receivers, it's somewhere around that 30, 31 age. These guys scoring lots of fantasy points. DK Metcalf there because he's scoring lots of fantasy points, and I believe he's only 25 years old.
Yeah, following up on this year, I'm pretty close as well with the guys I have in mind as well. No huge disagreements or anything. I do have Amon-Ra St. Brown in this range as well. He's still a tier below for me. Actually, no, he is tier 3 for me. He's in this range. And I will say that my tiers stack up a little differently. I just have less people in my tiers, but all of these guys that we're discussing are still top 12 guys. So everybody in this tier is still top 12 for me. It's just how they're shifted around. And mine are, I believe that most of these guys are coming for the cliff is coming for some of these guys. For Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, I have very moderate expectations next year because while I believe they're elite, I'm not just going to bank that they're going to be great next year. I think there's a world where if you're competing and you want to go and buy them during the season next year while they're still popping off from a team that maybe their season isn't going so well, I'm all about it. But they're not guys I'm looking to rank highly or draft highly. I know at the end of the day, we want to win. And I think these guys can help you with that. But I'd much rather bank on a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown over them is kind of the thing. But overall, still have these guys in my top 12. It's just, like I said, just some sorting differences more than anything. But go ahead, move on. Let's talk about this next tier. We got more exciting players to come. It just never stops.
It doesn't, man. Wide receivers. I love talking about wide receivers. It's so deep. I'm a known running back hater. I'm talking about running backs. I'm not very excited after the first 5.
Yeah.
But with wide receivers, we can talk about these guys all day. So in tier 4, we got Marquise Brown, who with D-Hop leaving out the door most likely, I think Marquise Brown is set up for success. He's going to have a long contract there. Kyler Murray will be back. It might not be early in the season, but I think Marquise Brown is a guy that doesn't need an elite quarterback to score fantasy points. He can create a lot of yards after the catch. I think he's really, really talented. He's just been limited because he's been in Baltimore for so many years. But we saw him when he was healthy and the number one wide receiver with the Cardinals. He was putting up big points. I think he goes back to doing that. So I have him here. Also have Devonta Smith, who we've seen really go off. And then also I got Chris Olave. Bob, this is your guy. I wasn't as big on him coming into the season, but he really, showed up for the Saints. Not a lot of competition in that wide receiver room. I know that's a little worry for some people, but the fact that he went out there and he did it and he put up those numbers. I mean, Ohio State, man, wide receiver between him and Garrett Wilson and the JSN coming out and all the talent that's come out before them, plus Marvin Harrison.
Yep.
Whew. They're going to be littering the top wide receiver ranks to go along with LSU and Alabama. And then I have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's finally moved into this top tier for me, top 15 or so. I was slow to get there, but, I can't fight the numbers, can't fight the statistics. He's been putting up big points. And no, I do have my worries with Jameson Williams coming in and how that affects his target share. I don't think he's going to, digress into becoming a flex player or something like that. But that does make it so I'm not as quick to rank him in that top 12.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think after next year, we'll have 5 or 6 wide receivers out of Ohio State in the top 12. We'll have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN more than likely, Marvin Harrison more than likely. Emeka Egbuka is going to be pushing for that as well. Yep. And then you have more guys coming down the pipeline that, we're getting excited about too, that it is nuts what Ohio State is doing. And I love it. It's turning into hey, just draft whoever the wide receiver at Ohio State is at this point. But
the 2 wide receivers out of Ohio State at this point.
Yeah. God. Yeah. It's nuts that they can put out 2 top talents every year, seemingly as it's going. But I like this tier a lot. I do have a lot of concerns with Marquise Brown. He's actually fairly significantly lower for me, closer to the wide receiver 20-ish range. A lot of that is baked into this season and kind of forecasting a value dip because I am concerned with when Kyler gets back and the fact that what that offense might look like in a new regime, depending on who the new coach is and all these things, when Kyler's back, if Kyler's 100% this year. And I just think next year we'll be talking about Marquise Brown a lot like we're talking about Deontay Johnson right now, where things just did not break right for Hollywood Brown next year, just like Deontay Johnson this year. So I still like Marquise Brown, especially if you're looking at like a 2024 window. I think next year he might be a really solid buy because I have a lot of concerns with how well he does this year. So I'm kind of forecasting a dip in his value, and that's why I have him a little lower. Otherwise, all these guys fairly similarly ranked for me. I have Amon-Ra a bit higher in the next tier up. He's locked in as a top 8 wide receiver for me, I believe, looking at my ranks. So he's a little higher for me, but otherwise I don't have too many issues with this tier. I like Devonta Smith. I've come around on him quite a bit. And Chris Olave, I have concerns this year with how good he's going to be, but he's still young enough where you can kind of take a year or 2 on the chin of him developing and getting a quarterback situation figured out. And especially if you're not trying to compete with him, that's going to be the key. If he's a key element to you competing, might be worth moving to try to get Devontae Adams or Cooper Kupp if that's how far away you are from winning a championship. But that's obviously situational. Let's move on to tier 5. What do you got for us here?
So with tier 5, we got Terry McLaurin, we got Deontay Johnson, Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Ayuk. This is this nice, middle-aged wide receivers moving forward, and they produce. They don't have quite the upside that some of these guys earlier have, but these guys are going to be living in that, top 24 wide receiver range for a while. And they're going to be guys that I can put on contending teams. And, if these guys are my wide receiver 3, filling in my flex spots, or able to fill in for my wide receiver 2 on a bye week, I'm pretty happy with that. These are guys that are going to score points, have a safe floor, have some upside on a week-to-week basis. I'm excited to have these guys for multiple years. So I like this tier. I think there's good value in this tier right now.
Yeah, I think you touched on it beautifully just there. There's a lot of value here for what you're paying to get these guys, because I think more than likely in ADP, a lot of these guys, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson specifically, their ADPs are much lower than you have here. And I think they're going to be producing this type of number. Deebo Samuel, I have some concerns with. It's one of those guys where we finally had a breakout year where he was great. And it wasn't just because he was running back Deebo. He was just very good. And then he was also running back Deebo in the second half of the season. But then we go back banged up, which was years coming into that year 2 years ago now was the ongoing concern, just constantly banged up. I love what Deebo Samuel can do when he's healthy, but he's, just never consistently healthy, it seems like. And I just think at some point you have to kind of really devalue a player that cannot consistently fill a lineup spot for you, where you're always having the headache of, man, is this guy going to play a full game when I need him to? Or is he going to be back next week after he's been gone for 2 more weeks, or whatever the case is? So I was big in on Deebo coming into last year. I wasn't real worried. I was feeling like we kind of had that. We were over the hump of all the injuries, kind of like we were with Aaron Jones when he finally got going. Big part of him stalling at the beginning of his career was he was just always banged up, started taking his health more seriously, and he played almost every game. He missed a couple here and there. But Deebo for me I just have big concerns long-term. But the rest of the tier, I love that Brandon Ayuk is getting some love here. He had a very quiet, good season. Nothing crazy. But with how young he is, I think he'll be 25 next year. Fairly young, going to be coming into a second contract soon. Yeah. A guy that I think if he was really ever unlocked in this offense or any offense, if he ends up going elsewhere, Brandon Ayuk, I think, can make some big leaps if he really gets unlocked. Like I said, I just don't think he's in a high power enough offense right now, at least from a aerial perspective. We know that run game is kind of wild, and obviously you have Kittle there and Deebo to compete with more often than not. But Brandon Ayuk had a quietly very awesome season. I'm here for it. Another thing I'm here for is this next tier. What do you got, Nate?
Well, Bob, real quick before we get to the next tier, I'm going to make a live rankings update. Sometimes you got to talk it out sometimes, and after talking this out and talking about the themes of these different tiers, then it makes a lot of sense for Marquise Brown to be in tier 5, because I think that's what he belongs. He belongs with those other guys who, as I said, aren't quite having as much upside as some of the younger guys, but going to give you those fantasy points. I believe Marquise Brown fits right into that tier. A little too high on him. I think we're in a better place now with Marquise Brown.
I agree. I think, I think he's a guy whose value stagnates for a year, and then we expect to bounce back next year. That's kind of where I'm at with him. I definitely want to heed what I should have had with Deontay Johnson last year. With him having a down season, I should have kind of been more on that projection. I really want to be ahead of the ball on Marquise Brown, because nothing's breaking right now for Marquise Brown next season. And it's already now. You're going to have a nice sell window coming up if you have him to move him, or if you're in a situation where you can afford to hold him for a year and not really need him. Like if you're in a rebuild, I would not be expecting much. But if you're trying to rely on him to compete next year, you're going to have a really nice sell window when DeAndre Hopkins is gone, that I think his value is going to peak. He was already looking at DLF's January ADP. He was like wide receiver 18. And that's just like, go sell him. There comes a point with players where you need to move on. So he's a player I'm looking to move. But speaking of players we're not looking to move, maybe let's talk about ranks that are not moving anymore. Let's go into tier 6.
Yeah, tier 6. So this is our last tier we're going to hit on here on the video. And real quick, I'm going to get the 2 guys in this tier that are so close to the tier above them. And that's DJ Moore and Michael Pittman Jr.
Sure.
As guys that are established wide receivers who are going, they're in the middle years or going into the middle years. And, not that they've stagnated, because we see wide receiver growth, throughout careers. Right. But they don't have quite the same upside as some of the really exciting young guys that are already at the top, like a DK Metcalf or Amon-Ra St. Brown. They just haven't had quite the performance. They haven't had quite the team situation that, gets us excited for fantasy football, and that matters. So, Michael Pittman Jr. and DJ Moore, I like these guys. They're talented. They're still young, but the inconsistency with their offense has really brought down their fantasy production. And, I just can't put them in that upper tier. Terry McLaurin, despite a very rocky offense, has continued to put up good numbers. And that means something. Michael Pittman Jr., DJ Moore, they get there some weeks and they have a decent finish for the year, but the inconsistency week to week is what keeps them here in this tier.
100%. I agree a lot. I thought there was another player you were going to mention, but those two, I think specifically just fit that, and their quarterback situations now and their offensive situations. Like, we don't know who the head coach is going to be. We don't know who the OC is going to be yet at the time of recording. It might have come out by the time, this gets around. We just have so much uncertainty with these guys. And a lot of the team audits I've been going over are teams that are fairly competitive, but they have guys that have question marks like this on their roster that are still valuable to some people, but not you if you're trying to compete. These are not guys, these are not horses I'm banking on or betting on going into 2023 if I want to win a championship. Like I said with Marquise Brown, if you got a year to eat on a guy where you can just kind of sit, I'm fine with it. But, these are guys that I'd much rather try to find ways to leverage deals to get out on and get to somebody who's in a more solid situation, find a way there and alleviate some question marks. Because I absolutely believe that, with the right quarterback and system, these guys easily jump up. DJ Moore, we've been calling for it for years. DJ Moore, I love as a talent. I was super high on him as a prospect. I drafted him in the first round of several rookie drafts that year. And I moved off him in every single league to this point because I had to. But love the player, love the talent, but we just haven't seen it come together. Michael Pittman, I'm not as huge of a prospective fan of. Yeah. But we've seen potential. We've seen flashes and all these things of how he can be good. But again, we wait until we finally have a situation worth getting real excited about, outside of being excited about a player who can do something. But at the end of the day, especially with fantasy, you kind of have to read the tea leaves. And, it's cool to love players and like players, but if they're not helping you get to the promised land, what are we doing at the end of the day? What I'm doing is I'm trying to get players that will. That's what I'm working on. So feel free to continue on with this tier. I definitely agree on those picks, though.
Yeah. And, the rest of this tier is made up of young guys, guys that were just rookies this past year. And that's Treylon Burks, Jamison Williams, and Jahan Dotson, 3 wide receivers that I have really loved. I have really talked up over the past year through the scouting process, after the draft, and into the season. I love all 3 of these guys and think they have the upside to jump into, one of those top 3 or 4 tiers. It's not there yet, but we've seen flashes from all 3 of these guys. And, I don't think it's, I think it'd be way too early to call it quits on any of these 3 guys. So I believe in the talent. I had Treylon Burks as my wide receiver 1 coming into the NFL draft. I love the upside that he brought. Jamison Williams, we said this entire offseason, don't worry about Jamison Williams's rookie year. People are going to be upset about it, but just buy him and wait until his sophomore year. Well, his sophomore year is coming up, so let's get excited. And then Jahan Dotson, a guy that led the NFL rookies in receiving touchdowns, Bob, with 7.
How many games did he miss, Nate?
He missed at least 5.
Yeah.
He was tied with Christian Watson. Christian Watson played 2 more games than him, I believe. Christian Watson, he scored some touchdowns real quick, real fast. Yeah. But Jahan Dotson, a guy that, I did not expect to be catching touchdowns. I expected him, with his yak ability, his separation ability, to be more like a Deontay. But if we can get a Deontay who can catch 7 touchdowns in the season versus a Deontay Johnson in Pittsburgh who catches 0 touchdowns in the season,
right,
then Jahan Dotson's going to be scoring you lots of fantasy points in the coming years.
No, I like him a lot. He was one too I thought might be pushing up into the next tier, just because I think that between the age of Terry McLaurin, getting to that point of where we're kind of starting to get concerned about age and things like that, and Jahan Dotson just coming to the league and, when healthy, setting it on fire. Now we just need to see more of that, more of the on fire Jahan Dotson and on the field Jahan Dotson. And I think he can easily jump up to, a top 15, 16 asset in the wide receiver pool at least.
Absolutely. And who was saying to pick him up in the back half of drafts last year?
Everybody here at the Dynasty
Rewind. We've loved Jahan Dotson for a while. I picked him up in the second round in some drafts last year. Yeah, it was almost too easy, especially after the NFL told us, hey, this guy's talented and we're going to use him. And people still didn't believe it for some reason. I think if Burks, Williams, Dotson, if those guys show out their sophomore year or continue to improve statistically, they're probably going to jump over the tier 5 guys that we've just talked about into that tier 4, where it's those talented, productive young players that still have years ahead of them to grow and create upside. I think maybe it's not into that tier, but it's a tier between those two guys.
I think that's where you end up flipping tiers almost entirely, because tier 5 has a lot of guys that just don't have much ceiling left anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, you know what you got out of them, and hey,
yeah, exactly.
We love the potential of players around here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's more realistic that they flip. The only one I really have some issue with, and this is Jameson Williams, and not that I disagree with the talent or anything like that, but ethos of mine or a methodology of mine is at some point players are worth selling. And I think Jameson Williams, for what he's done, is pretty close to that point. Another guy who's a mid-teen wide receiver when it comes to DLF ADP right now, a guy who's done bubkiss to really deserve that type of, rank on him, especially with where Amon-Ra St. Brown's going. A guy if I had him anywhere, which I don't, unfortunately, I would be looking to sell him because I think you can get more for him right now and get into a as good of, if not better, situation than otherwise. If you drafted him last year at the back half of the first round, which I think is about where he was going, top 9, top 8, he's a guy you could flip for a Devonta Adams or a Cooper Kupp right now on a team that might be looking to flip things around, rebuild. And if you're looking to be more competitive, I think you get more out of those guys and make more of a championship push with those guys. Not a move I'm probably doing until we get to the season, because I want to, the one thing I want to touch on this year is not making those big moves, those big championship type moves at the beginning of seasons, because you're just setting yourself up for that player to have more time to get injured. Whereas when you get closer and closer to your deadline, you have more time to kind of pick and choose and things like that. And you're avoiding some injury issues, possibly. Obviously, they can happen anytime. You're just alleviating some concerns. But overall, like this tier, like where we're at, JMO's not far off for me. I think he's still right around, a back end of wide receiver 2 value. Yeah. But where he's going in the realm of, the market versus where I believe he probably should be is exponentially higher. And therefore, I'm looking for deals. I'm looking for situations. I
get it. I like Jameson Williams. I like his talent, but you're right. Just value wise, what he's produced versus where he can go right now in a startup draft. Yeah. And, I like Jameson Williams's ceiling, but if he's being, valued as a top 15 wide receiver, then it makes sense to move on from risk and acquire something that you feel more confident about or more safe in that can give you rather same value. I don't know, Jameson Williams, I love the guy, but with the situation, Amon-Ra St. Brown there, it's unlikely he's going to, end up being a top 5 wide receiver, a top 10 wide receiver. On a consistent basis. So, if he's being valued that way, it does make sense to sell high. I can sell high players I like if the market is even higher on those guys than I am.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a big thing to note if you see a market shift of a guy that, because if he's being valued at wide receiver 15 right now, realistically, where does he go? Fringe top 12? And there's just not much more value there. And it's like, I know we want to keep points on a roster at some point. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm looking to diversify, especially if I can get multiple assets or possibly better assets. There's always the case of, this guy might be valued lesser than him, but I believe more in him. Like right now, somebody who is vastly valued less than him in most cases is Christian Watson. I would flip Jameson Williams, for Christian Watson plus. I think that's a deal where you could send Jameson Williams in a third and get Christian Watson in a second in most cases. Yeah, you probably for next year, or you're only flipping a few picks this year. Those are the type of moves that I'm always looking to make.
Yeah, and just to say, I would probably move Jameson Williams for a top 5 pick in a super flex league this year.
Oh, easily.
And I think I'd go as far as maybe up at 7.
I'd move him for that easily. I'd move him for the only where I'd be less interested. Honestly, in a super flex, I'm pretty interested in the whole first round. In all honesty, especially if I'm getting a second next year or something to.
Oh, in addition, of course, yeah, absolutely.
Because you want to move 2 if you're going to move one asset like this, a young asset with upside ish. Still want to get that additional asset to make it worth moving.
Always better get the additional asset. Agreed there.
For sure. Speaking of additional assets that you could have, that is it for this one. But if you want more rankings from myself, Mike, Nate, we got rookie rankings, we got dynasty rankings. Nate has Devy rankings over on patreon.com/dynasty rewind. On top of all that, you get bonus podcasts, you get extra audits every single week, breaking down multiple rosters of different builds, different league formats, and things like that. On top of all that, you get an amazing Discord community group chat where we just BS about football all day long, and we have a memes channel and a bunch of other random channels. But any advice that you need, trade advice 24/7, get over there, cop all of that right now as soon as you can. The links will be in the description box below, and there will be a pinned comment with details as well. But Nate, this was a blast. I appreciate you sharing your rankings with me today, as always. For everybody out there, we will see y'all in the next one. But until then, y'all have a good one.